Every time we sing that song, I think about getting out in the aisle and dancing.
Yeah, right.
But you don't want to see that. You really don't. You wouldn't have wanted to see that when I was a young man. Well, we're here on Easter Sunday. I'm so thankful that all of you are here. The first Easter Sunday was so good because Saturday had been so bad, and it made a lot of difference. On Saturday, it seemed like Christ was defeated. His body was in the tomb, and he was utterly dead. That spear in his side had sliced his heart. His tongue had gone silent, and death was absolute. His enemies were confident, and it was finished in more ways than one. It had all ended. The deed was done, and nobody was betting on a resurrection. Now, we've been in the story for now 27 weeks, beginning with the creation and coming through today until the resurrection, with about 4 more weeks to go. In the story today, we're going to see how we get unstuck from Saturday and move into Sunday. So let's read in Matthew 27, verses 62 to 64. The next day, the one after preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. "Sir," they said, "we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.' So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead. This last deception will be worse than the first." You see, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the rest of the religious leaders were no longer concerned with Jesus. It was done. So now they're concerned with his disciples. But if they only knew, it really wasn't necessary for them to be concerned about the disciples, because they were all hiding. They had all fled. They weren't anywhere around. They had scattered, and they were hiding in every available spot. They were in fear that there was a cross with their name on it in the future. And so they were scattered across the countryside. Now, the first thing I want us to see is that Saturday was a day of no hope and no courage. It's hard to imagine that among the disciples, no one recalled Jesus' words that the religious leaders seemed to know. He said he was going to rise in 3 days, but the disciples apparently didn't get it. In Mark 8:31, he then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. Mark 9:31. Because he was teaching his disciples, he said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise." And then one more, Mark 10:33 and 34. "We are going up to Jerusalem," he said, "and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him, and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise." Why didn't one of them do the math? Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Hope is not lost. But they did not have any hope on this day. They didn't have any courage. The women were stuck on a Saturday way of living as well. They were going to the tomb early on Sunday morning, not expecting a resurrection, but going to embalm a body. Mark 16, verses 1 to 3. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, "Who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb?" There was no parade going on. They weren't excited about what had happened. There was no expectation on their parts of a resurrection. They were stuck on Saturday. You ever been there? You ever been stuck on Saturday when you feel no hope? You feel despair in your life, that there's nothing ahead but gray days, and you feel like you have no courage. You bet the farm on the wrong horse. You hitched your wagon to the wrong star. You put all of your eggs into the wrong basket, and you have no more courage left. There's no positive outlook. There's no optimism. Your outlook is a down look. And if you put your hope in someone, it seems they let you down. Maybe even worse, they died. But we all die, don't we? We all face that in the end, but we try to avoid it. As human beings, we try to avoid death, and we can get easily stuck in the Saturday state of mind with no hope, no courage, no plans, believing that death is the final end, and there's nothing else. Death is the last slap in the face. Death is the last kick in the pants. Death is the final insult to this life when you have no hope, when you have nothing to look to. You try to live a good life. You try to make something of yourself, and you try to make the world a little better place to live. You brush your teeth every day. You pay your bills. You do all the right things. You raise your kids in a way that you hope is good. But in the end, we all die. You do good to other people. You're a good husband, or you're a good wife. You're a good mom, and you're a good dad. And you are accomplishing something in this world. And you try to stay healthy. You try to eat right and exercise and do all of those things. But in the end, you die. We all do. We all face that. I've checked the statistics, and they still hover right around 100% death rate. Everybody dies. Elvis died. Princess Diana died. John Kennedy died. The poet dies, and his poetry is buried with him. The music dies, and we sing, "Is that all there is?" There's something about that sucks us into a Saturday state of mind, thinking that's all there is. There's no hope. You know, I believe that if there was no answer for the grave, if there was no answer for death facing all of us, that that we would live in a Saturday kind of despair all of our lives. We'd never get over it. Or you might have a moment or two, but in the end, if you live that way with no hope, that Saturday state of mind, then it's nothing but despair. And that's why we love Easter. That's why we love this day, because every human being needs to hear the promise of God. Every human being needs to hear that death is not the dead end of your road, but death is only an exit ramp to something much greater. And there is hope. Max Lucado tells a story about his brother. I read this the other day, and I didn't even know he had a brother. I had never heard this. He had a brother whose name was D. D was his older brother, and he was a friendly, warm, outgoing athlete in school, liked by everyone, while Max, when he was a teenager, a young man, was very shy and didn't hardly talk to anybody and didn't have many friends. So his brother D was kind of a personal ambassador for Max. But in his teens, D met a bootlegger, a guy who was buying beer for high school kids, and he befriended D, And the next thing Dee knew, he spent 4 decades drinking away his life. He lost everything. He lost his health. He lost his friends. He lost his marriage. He lost jobs. He lost a career. And at 54 years old, he made the decision to trade his bottle in for a Bible. And he was restored to Christ. He restored his relationships. He did the best that he could, but years of alcohol and 3 packs of cigarettes a day had taken a toll on him. And one day he had some terrible chest pains. And they took him to the hospital, and by the time his wife and his son arrived, he was gone. So the doctor took them into the room where his body was, and the first thing they noticed was one hand resting on his thigh, made into the sign of love. And Max says, I know why. I know why that happened, because he had moved from Saturday to Sunday, and he knew Christ. He had moved from desperation to hope, from fear to courage, by the grace of our God. He knew Jesus. You ever think how you want to face death? I hope that if you're not excited by the prospect, that at least you face it with courage, because Jesus will move us from that Saturday mentality to Sunday, Resurrection Day, a day of eternal life and hope. Now, up until now, this has kind of been a downer, hasn't it? Talking about death and desperation. But you know, when you move to Sunday, it takes us from a Saturday death, defeated life, to a Sunday life that defeats death. And that's what we're looking at. It moves us from the last day of death to the first day of life. That's what Sunday does for us. Look at the time that he did that with a woman named Mary Magdalene. John 20, verses 10 to 18. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw 2 angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" They have taken my Lord away, she said, and I don't know where they have put him. Now, I don't know a whole lot about Mary Magdalene, but I do know this. She buried a man who was more than just a friend. She buried the only one who ever helped her, the only one who ever befriended her. She buried a man who believed her, a man who gave her value, a man who gave her worth and dignity. You see, we know that Jesus had cast 7 demons from her. In Mark 16:9, when Jesus rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had driven 7 demons. Now, 7 in the Bible is a number that is a complete number, and it shows us completeness. And so she had 7 demons. She was completely afflicted by demons. And there's no telling how she appeared for us today. There's no telling how she acted. And nobody wanted to be around her. Everybody avoided her. She was so completely afflicted by demons that, that everybody stayed away from her. But Jesus did not avoid her. Jesus befriended her. Jesus had found her as a friend, and she found him as a friend. And her future now was buried. So she was stuck on Saturday. There are times in life when our despair can get so deep and our sadness so thick, the canyon can get so deep and the wall so steep that we feel like we can't get out and there's no hope. And those are tough times, times when we feel like if anything bad is going to happen, it's going to happen to me. I'm the one that it's going to come down on. And when somebody says, count your blessings, or be thankful, it just doesn't seem to work anymore. And there we are, stuck on Saturday. And maybe you think, what will Jesus do during that time? And I have the answer for you. It says in John 20, verses 14 to 15, "At this she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, 'Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you are looking for?' Thinking he was the gardener, she said, 'Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him.'" You see, Mary missed the miracle of the empty tomb. She missed the miracle of two angels being in that tomb and speaking to her, but Jesus did not give up on her. Let's finish that passage out in John 20, 16 to 18. Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. You see, the empty tomb didn't take away her despair and her grief. The angels didn't take away her despair and her grief. So Jesus took things into his own hands, and he gently gave himself to her by calling her by name. He called her name. That song we were singing, "You called my name and I ran out of that grave," that applies to her. She heard Jesus call her name, and she ran out of that tomb of despair. Why? Because he's Jesus. I want to read something that Max Lucado wrote. He says, Jesus could have given Mary Magdalene the stars, for he owned every one of them. He could have entrusted her with power because all authority had been given to him. He could have given her the ability to do great works, for he had just defeated hell and death. But when it came time to honor this devoted servant, who was the only one still calling him Lord, what Jesus did was this: he gave her himself. He called her by name. "When you call my name, I ran out of that grave." He's a patient God. He shows us the heart of God. He is so patient and kind that the prophet Micah wrote these words in Micah 7, 18 and 19. "Who is a God like you, who pardons sin and forgives the transgression of the remnant of his inheritance? You do not stay angry forever, but delight to show mercy. You will again have compassion on us. You will tread our sins underfoot and hurl all our iniquities into the depths of the sea."
Amen.
And I'll add and post a sign that says no fishing. Don't go after those sins yourself. And once again, Jesus will have compassion on you. If you do not find the answers for your death question, you'll stay stuck on Saturday. But the answer is there. Are you maybe today in a season of darkness? You know, sometimes when we get in that season, we assume that God stands there with his arms folded and look at us and say, "Why don't you wake up? I've sent you miracles. I've sent you prophets. I've sent you teachers. I'm just going to give up on you." But he does not. The story tells us he never gives up. He always keeps coming. He always is talking to us. He keeps pursuing us wherever we go. Psalm 30, verse 5, "Weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning." Some of us here today are in the valley. Some of us are in the valley of bad health, the valley of no job, the valley of a struggling marriage or other relationship. I say to you this morning, be patient and watch, and Jesus will have compassion on you. You may be stuck on Saturday, but in heaven the calendar's already flipped. It's Sunday. It's Sunday. Be quiet and listen. Jesus is calling you by name. It's Sunday. It's Sunday, and God is inviting you to move from Saturday state of mind into Sunday. And the choice is yours.